Before we begin, I want you to remember something. Not every horror story comes from ghosts or monsters or the shadows in the woods. Sometimes it's the silence itself that does it, the quiet that settles right before the world decides to stop behaving the way it should. This story was sent in by someone who lived through one of those nights, a night when the snow fell too heavy and the air stopped being cold. She said the animals knew at first, and by the time she and her husband realized what was happening, it was already too late. She called her story The Blizzard Visitor. And if you ever find yourself trapped inside during a storm, listening to the wind fade away, just remember, the quiet isn't always empty. I almost didn't make it home that night. 1 minute I was singing along to the radio, and the next I was staring wide-eyed at the darkest storm clouds I'd ever seen rolling in over the Vermont mountains. It wasn't just snow, it felt wrong. The air was too still, the wind too sharp, the kind that whispers before it screams. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky had turned a bruised gray. The cold bit deep, and the wind howled through the trees as I ran up the porch steps and shut the door behind me. Luke was waiting by the living room window. My husband. He didn't even turn around when I called his name. He just said, "You made it just in time." Outside, the snow had already begun to swallow the street. Within minutes, the world beyond our front yard was gone. "It came out of nowhere," I said, setting my back down. Before he could reply, I heard the faint sound of the doggy door creaking open. We didn't have a dog. Luke smiled. Rigoton's back, an old orange cat, padded into the room, paws muddy fur, matted with melting snow. He meowed, once looked at us like we'd interrupted something, and leapt onto the couch. "Too cold out there for you, huh?" Luke said, scratching behind his ears. The cat purred deep, rhythmic, like an old engine, and curled up by the heater. For a while, everything felt warm, safe. We had no reason to think the storm outside was anything more than weather. We couldn't have been more wrong. Half an hour later, the doggy door opened again. This time, it wasn't Rigoton. A black and white border collie burst into the dining room, barking and whining in panic. "That's Mrs. Johnson's dog," I said. "Tucker." The poor thing's tail was tucked tight between his legs, his fur clumped with ice. When I tried to approach, he snapped just once and backed into the corner, trembling. Luke frowned. "He's never like this." He grabbed his phone. "I'll call Mrs. Johnson, let her know we've got him." He didn't get the chance. "No signal," he said after a minute. UI checked. Nothing. No bars. Our Wi-Fi was gone too. That was when the scratching started. Light, frantic tapping coming from the bathroom window. Luke followed me as I opened the door. On the sill was a small furry creature, pressing itself against the glass. What in the world? The animal had torn straight through the screen. Its fur was wet, patchy, wild. Luke leaned in. "It's a marten," he said. "They're rare here." "It looks terrified." I hesitated. It was scratching so desperately, it looked like it might break its claws. Luke's voice softened. "Let it in. It's freezing to death." Reluctantly, I opened the window just enough for the marten to squeeze through. I didn't notice the others waiting outside. In an instant, a rush of tiny shapes darted in after it. A flood of mice, a squirrel, even a red cardinal. They scurried across the tiles, squeaking and chirping, scattering into corners of the house. And then, silence. When we returned to the living room, more animals had appeared, Two stray dogs, a raccoon, a trembling fox, all pressed against walls, hiding beneath furniture, their eyes wide and unblinking. Not one of them made a sound. They weren't running from the storm. They were hiding from something else. I walked to the window, heart pounding. The blizzard was in full force, snow spinning in all directions, but it looked wrong. It wasn't moving naturally. It wasn't blowing in any one direction. It just fell straight down, heavy and endless, like a curtain being pulled across the world. Luke joined me, carrying Rigoton in his arms. "You okay? Does it feel cold to you?" I asked. He gave me a confused look. I pressed my hand against the glass. It wasn't cold, not even cool. "My breath," I said softly. "It's not fogging up." We stood there side by side, watching the snow. The world beyond our window had no color, no sound, just white and gray and stillness. Something was wrong with the air itself. The first sound we heard in nearly 20 minutes was the crunch of heavy footsteps outside. We turned toward the window just as a massive black shape staggered into view. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. It moved awkwardly, dragging one leg behind it. When it came close enough for the porch light to touch, I realized it was a bear, a huge one, and it was dying. Its fur was soaked in blood and frost. Its lower jaw hung loose, broken. It stumbled forward until it was just inches from the glass, staring straight at us. Those eyes, God, I'll never forget them. They weren't wild or angry. They were pleading. The bear collapsed, breath rattling. A pool of dark red spread beneath it. Even as it died, it didn't look away. Then, nothing. No movement, no sound. The forest had stopped breathing. We backed away from the window. Neither of us spoke. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out. Every animal in the house began to cry at once. The dogs whined, the mice squeaked, even the cardinal chirped in frantic bursts. I grabbed 2 flashlights from the kitchen drawer. Luke took one and sat beside me on the floor, Rigoton still in his lap. We didn't talk about the bear. We didn't talk about the storm. We just listened to the silence between sounds. Rigoton, oddly, was calm. She purred quietly, staring toward the dark window. All the others cowered. Only she seemed unafraid. And that scared me more than anything. "Do you hear that?" Luke whispered. At first I didn't. Then I realized what was missing. The wind, the animals, the creaks of the house. Everything had gone silent. And then a voice. "Hello." It came from outside. A man's voice, clear, calm. "Anyone in there? I need some help." Luke moved as if to stand, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. The voice came again, closer now. "Please, it's so cold out here. Can I come in?" Something about it was off. There was no shiver, no strain, no breath between the words. It sounded practiced, rehearsed. I held my breath. So did Luke. Then came the footsteps, slow, crunching around the house. The voice moved with them. "Come on now," it said right outside the dining room window. "Don't you have room for one more?" I couldn't look. I couldn't move. Beside me, Luke took one sharp breath, then nothing. The voice chuckled, soft, too human. Then it was gone. A few seconds later, the wind came roaring back. But it didn't sound like wind anymore. When I finally opened my eyes, the storm outside was fading to gray. Luke sat frozen, staring at the window. His flashlight had rolled from his hand. His skin looked trained pale, his mouth half open. "Luke." No response. "Luke, please." I shook him, but he didn't blink, didn't move. His eyes were still fixed on that same spot by the window. At the hospital, they called it a stroke, a sudden one. I wanted to believe them. But when I told one of the nurses what happened, she turned pale and walked away without another word. Luke never woke up again. Not really. He blinked, sometimes moved his fingers, but that was all. Whatever he saw that night, he didn't come back from it. It's been 5 years since that night. I still live in the same house. Luke's still here, though he doesn't speak. Rigerton still visits. She's older now, slower, but she always curls up on Luke's chest, purring like nothing's changed. Sometimes, when she's there, he seems calmer. Sometimes, his eyes even move just a little. I've tried to let go of that night, but I can't. I think about Tucker, the collie who ran off the morning after the storm and was never seen again. I think about the animals huddled in corners, the bear bleeding out in the snow. I think about that voice outside and the way it laughed. And I think about what Luke saw, what broke his mind in an instant. Sometimes I ask him again, "What did you see that night?" He never answers. But every now and then, his eyes drift toward the window. And in the dead quiet of winter nights, when the wind dies and the snow falls straight down, I swear I hear someone outside, knocking 3 times. They say what happened that night was just a blizzard, a freak storm, nothing more. But if that were true, then why won't the animals come near that house anymore? Why does her husband still stare at the same window 5 years later, like he's waiting for something to come back? Maybe he saw something no one was supposed to see. Maybe he looked too long at whatever was standing in the snow. And maybe somewhere out there, when the wind stops and everything goes silent for just a few seconds, it's waiting for someone else to look. Sleep well tonight, and if you hear a knock at your window, don't answer.